Okay, you're going to want your table, your actually bandsaw wizard table, mounted on your existing table so it rides perfectly perpendicular and parallel to your blade. If it's off a little bit, then everything else of your T-slots will not cut properly. You won't get a 90-degree cut, you won't get a 45-degree cut if you measure it. So it's important that you actually put your guide runner in here and find out which one you need to use, because there's actually two guide runners that come with your bandsaw table. There's one that's 3/4 and one that's a little under, by it's marked minus. All of these slots aren't always the same size. Traditionally they're supposed to be 3/4, but some are under, some are exact. The older ones are a little over. So what you do is you take one of the two sticks provided and you put it in your dado. This is a miter gauge dado. Now you see how loose that is? It seems like it's a little bit loose. Well, that's too loose. We want it more snug than that. You put the other one in, it's 3/4, and it actually slides, it doesn't wiggle. So that's actually the one we want. Now what's going to happen is that we're going to mount this, so there's your screw holes, we're going to mount this to the underside of your bandsaw wizard table. So if you put this in here, now you know you selected the right one. Remove the other and you can use that for future projects for something else. But now, depending on if you have a fence on your bandsaw or not, there's two different ways to approach getting this in a perfect position. Using your fence is actually going to be the easiest, because if you take a look at the back of your table, which is down here, there is actually a saw kerf that we put on there, so you know exactly where you want your bandsaw blade to land. This is the edge that's going to follow your fence on your bandsaw, and I happen to know that this dimension from here to here is 9.5 inches. So you get your trusty tape out and make sure I'm correct. 9.5, that's where you want it. So what you do is you set your fence to 9.5. It's right, it's 9 right now, but you got to make sure that this fence is parallel to your dado in your table. If it's not parallel, you're going to have this track incorrectly and it's going to be always off. So do yourself a favor, true up your fence to your own miter gauge dado in your saw. Take a measurement from here to here and then take another one on the back side of it. If it's equal, then we know this is going to be parallel to your dado. If it's not, you're going to complain that this jig doesn't work very well. So take your time and set it up correctly. So since we're using this fence, I'm going to set it at 9.5, tighten it down, and now we're set. So theory is you bring up your table, this edge is going to go up against there, you're going to turn your bandsaw on and you're just going to follow your table and pretty much cut into your own bandsaw wizard table. And you're going to cut it all the way to this point, which is this V groove. We want it to stop in the center of this T-track because that's going to become your pivot point for future circles or radius cuts or miscellaneous other items. So let's go ahead and cut it. Now that you've selected your guide runner that fits inside your own bandsaw's table, and it's a nice fit, and you've already measured the 9.5 inches required from your bandsaw's fence, and the fence is parallel to your dado, make sure it is, it's got to be parallel. Now you can cut your bandsaw wizard table and stop at the V groove. You're going to follow the fence, and it's got to be tight up against the fence so you get a nice cut. Leave the guide runner in the bandsaw so you can actually screw it to the underside easily. Start slowly and let the machine and its blade do its job. There's no reason to rush a cut. You want a nice cut through this thing. And you want to stop at the V groove. Coming close. So we're going to stop at the V groove. There it is. We'll turn off the machine. It's still up against the fence. If you have a brake, use the brake on your bandsaw. Now the idea is that you're aligning this guide runner, and there's the other end, and I leave mine just proud of the other side. What I do is I clamp it. I'm pretty sure your shop has a clamp or two. Clamp the ends so they stay put, because what we're going to do is we're going to screw, because there's two screw holes on the other side that you can access to just sitting like it is. I leave this a little long because it's easier to feed when you actually slide this off and you want to put it back on. It gives you an indicator of where it needs to be. So I'll clamp this on here. Then I'll grab a screw gun and a screw and mount a screw from the underside on here and here. So I do this because now I know that this is not going to slip and it's going to stay in the correct place. Make sure your table is tied up against the fence. So now it stays put. So you can remove the table and its clamps. As you know, that guide runner is going to stay put. I'm going to flip it over, slide it out, flip it over, and we're going to put the remaining two screws in. So now it lives where it's supposed to be. Slide my fence over, and now this thing should ride exactly where it did before. And it's independent, and you can't wiggle it back and forth. Now you've got this blade right at the V groove. So now you can actually mount your angle clamp on the underside as a stop that rests up against your fence's rail. I happen to actually have a fence rail that's a little odd, so I actually cut it to match the rail. So this gets mounted on the underside, and you make sure this is centered on this T-track. Okay, now it's time to set your stop block, and you want this table to stop always right at that V groove, which happens to be the center of the pivot that you can adjust later. So you want it right in the center of that on the edge of the blade. If in fact you put a bigger blade on it, then you can adjust your stop so the front teeth are always in line with that center point. Now that you actually have your bandsaw blade centered on your pivot point, you need to install your stop block and clamp. I happened to cut mine because it was not quite fitting right, so that's why it's out of wood, so you can do anything you need to. Yours may be different than my saw. Slide this in. You want to basically hit your rail or the edge of your table and clamp it down. Then you come up here and make sure that it's still on center, and it is. So tighten, and actually, you know, you don't have to tighten it real tight, just snug. There's no reason to over tighten anything. Now that you have your other stop block and clamp on the other end of the table, and you have the blade where you want it, and you want to have this table fixed so it does not move or slide or do anything, there's actually 2 more clamps and 2 more T-tracks that you actually put on either side of the kerf. That way you have a nice even table and it's not offset. So you end up putting this basically just like you did the other side. I already cut to the profile that I wanted for my edge of table, and you tighten her up. It's pretty straightforward. You can leave these large, small, whatever you need to do. You might want to put your own radius or angle, and now it's clamped and this thing does not move. Just an extension of your own table.